I will make you look prettier if you agree to marry my mummy.
I will marry her, I promise.
Sometimes, life tests us in ways we never imagine. A lonely billionaire, a struggling single mother, and a little girl with a wish that could change everything. What happens when innocence meets wealth? And love finds its way into the most unexpected heart. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. That way, you'll never miss a story that can make you laugh, cry, and believe in miracles all at once. Adrian Kingsley walked through the marble halls of his mansion as if he were passing through a museum. The floors shone under the morning sunlight, and every painting, every vase, every piece of furniture seemed perfectly placed, untouched, and cold. The silence in the house was almost heavy. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of emptiness, the kind that pressed against your chest if you stayed too long in one room. At the long dining table, Adrian sat alone. Breakfast was always the same: plain eggs, toast, and black coffee, but he never really tasted it. He picked at the food, staring at the table as though it held secrets he didn't want to see. The table was enormous, made of dark polished wood, and it could have fed a dozen people comfortably, but he always sat alone at the head. "Good morning, sir," said James, his butler, quietly, placing the coffee in front of him. Adrian nodded slightly, not looking up. "Morning." James hesitated for a moment. "Sir, would you like the papers later?" Adrian said, his voice calm but distant. James bowed and left the room, moving quietly across the polished floors. Every staff member in the house moved the same way, careful not to disturb the order, careful not to make noise. They feared him, not openly, but in the way people fear the storm coming in the distance. They respected him too, because Adrian Kingsley had power, wealth, and influence that most people only read about in magazines. But they didn't know the sadness that lingered behind his sharp suits and controlled expressions. Adrian's eyes wandered to a closed door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar, but still locked. He never opened it. He didn't need to. The baby room was untouched, frozen in time. A small crib, carefully made up, soft pastel colors on the walls, stuffed animals lined neatly in a row, a mobile above the crib that would never turn. Sometimes he stood outside the door, listening to the faint creak of the hinges, imagining what could have been. He swallowed hard and looked away. He had everything: money, success, a mansion that could have been in a magazine, but he had never known the sound of laughter echoing in these halls. No footsteps ran across these polished floors in a rush to greet him. No little voice shouted, "Daddy," when he came home. The house was perfect, yes, but it was not a home. Adrian picked up his coffee again, swirling it absently in the cup. Another day, he whispered to himself. Another empty day. The echo of his words felt strange, bouncing off the high ceilings and the expensive paintings. In that moment, even the gold frames and crystal chandeliers seemed cold, lifeless, and mocking. He took a bite of his toast and nearly choked, not because of the food, but because the silence felt so loud, so heavy, that he realized how deeply he had learned to live alone. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly as Adrian waited in the grand office. He tapped his fingers on the polished mahogany desk, eyes scanning the neatly stacked files. His patience thinning with every passing second. He had appointments, meetings, phone calls. He did not have time to wait for people who could not even arrive on time. The door finally creaked open, and a frazzled woman hurried in, a small bundle pressed to her chest. Her hair was slightly messy, her clothes wrinkled, and she looked like she had run through a storm to get here. In her arms, A little girl was crying, her tiny fists waving in the air. "I am so sorry I'm late," the woman said, panting. It's my daughter. She wouldn't stop crying, and Adrian's eyebrows shot up. "Your daughter," his voice was sharp. This was a job interview. For a maid. Not a daycare center. I asked for someone punctual, disciplined. "And I know, the woman interrupted quickly, bowing slightly. "I'm sorry. I really tried. She's only 4. She's scared of new places. I didn't want to leave her crying alone, so..." Before Adrian could respond, a small voice piped up from the woman's arms. "Hi," the girl's tears paused for a moment as she poked her little head out from behind her mother's shoulder. Her hair was messy, her cheeks red from crying. But her eyes sparkled like tiny lights in the dim office. "Hi, mister." Adrian froze. The sound was unexpected, almost shocking. He stared at the little girl, completely disarmed. She waved a tiny hand enthusiastically, and something inside him softened. Though he had no idea why. You can see me?" the girl asked, blinking rapidly. Her voice barely louder than a whisper. Adrian cleared his throat. Yes, I see you." The woman Lily looked mortified. "Emma, please, don't." But Emma ignored her, grinning now through the remnants of tears. "Your house is really big, and it's so quiet. I like it." Adrian's sharp expression faltered. He glanced down his office, then back at the tiny girl, and couldn't help but feel the silence of the house press against him differently now. Almost accusingly. The walls, the polished floors, the cold paintings, they suddenly felt emptier without a small voice to fill the air. Lily knelt down slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. She just wanted to say hello," she murmured, apologetic. "I know this is not what you expected. But I can manage, I promise. I've been working for years. My daughter doesn't usually." Adrian held up a hand, stopping her words before they could become a rush of excuses. He looked from the little girl to Lily, measuring something he couldn't name. "You're late, unprepared." And yet, his voice trailed off, the corners of his mouth twitched. Almost like he was trying to resist a smile. "Yet your daughter somehow makes me forget that. For a second, this office feels less like a tomb." Emma giggled. "I'm funny, not funny," Adrian said, carefully, still slightly stiff, but lively, very lively. Lily blinked, caught between relief and disbelief. You're not going to send us away?" Adrian hesitated. He hated chaos. He hated interruptions. And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself nodding slowly. "No, stay. Let's see how this goes." Emma clapped her hands. "Hey, I like your mansion. Can I see the carpets?" Lily covered her mouth, trying not to laugh at her daughter's boldness. Adrian's eyes narrowed at the idea he had spent years protecting those carpets, but then, for the first time in a long while, he felt something new, curiosity, and a strange, cautious warmth. Emma wriggled in her mother's arms, her small hands reaching toward the shiny floor, the towering furniture, and the endless space around her. She looked up at Adrian with wide eyes, her lip quivering as if she were about to make some important announcement. Then, without warning, she blurted out, loud enough to echo across the grand room, "Your house is too big for just one sad uncle." Adrian froze mid-step, his hand hovering over a stack of papers. His perfectly groomed eyebrows shot up. His lips twitched, unsure whether to frown or laugh. The house had always been silent, controlled, precise, but this tiny human had just walked in and declared his private world too big for him. "Excuse me," he said slowly, his voice low but curious, his usual icy tone missing a beat. Emma bounced lightly in Lily's arms. "I said it. It's too quiet. Too empty. You should have toys. And laughter. And a dog. Maybe a small dragon." Lily's face went bright red. She quickly put a hand over her daughter's mouth. "Emma. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, sir. I don't know where she doesn't usually." Adrian's lips twitched again, and this time a small smile broke through. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "A dragon, huh?" Emma nodded seriously. "Yes. Dragons are fun. And scary, but fun. That's what you need." "Fun." Lily bent down to apologize again, murmuring, "I am so sorry, sir. I can control her, I promise. She's excited, and it's been a long morning." Adrian shook his head slowly, still smiling faintly. He realized that for the first time in years, no one in this house had spoken to him like this, not staff, not colleagues, not even friends. This little girl had not only spoken, she had judged him. "All right," he said after a long pause, looking at Lily, then back at Emma, who was now grinning triumphantly. "You may have made a valid point about the size of my house." He paused, then added carefully, "I will hire you on a trial basis. Let's see if you and your daughter can survive the quiet here." Lily's eyes widened. "Oh really? You mean it?" "Yes," Adrian said, still strangely amused. "But know this, I expect you both to follow the rules, and try not to destroy the carpets." Emma squealed in delight. "I'll try, maybe. But dragons don't follow rules." Adrian let out a small chuckle, shaking his head as Lily buried her face in her hands, embarrassed but relieved. Somehow, in that moment, the mansion felt a little less cold, a little less like a museum, and a little more alive. Emma carefully lifted her little plastic cup of bright red juice, holding it with both hands like it was a treasure. Her tiny fingers were sticky, her face determined, and her eyes wide with concentration. She tiptoed across the vast white carpet in the middle of the living room, imagining herself on a mission, an explorer crossing dangerous lands. Only instead of lava, there was juice. And instead of monsters, there were, well, giant shiny furniture. Lily followed behind. Her nerves stretched thin. "Be careful, Emma, one spill and..." Her voice trailed off as she imagined the worst. That carpet was not just white. It was white like freshly fallen snow, pristine and smooth, worth thousands of dollars. She had already lived through mornings where Emma had spilled cereal, knocked over milk, and left chocolate handprints all over their tiny apartment. But this could be catastrophic. Almost there, Emma whispered to herself, waddling slowly, like a tiny general carrying precious supplies to safety. And then it happened. One tiny misstep. Emma's foot caught the edge of the rug. The cup tipped, juice arsed through the air in a perfect, horrifying curve. Lily's scream caught in her throat as the red-orange liquid hit the white carpet, spreading like wildfire across the fibers. She rushed forward, frantically trying to lift Emma out of harm's way while simultaneously grabbing napkins, a cloth, anything, but her hands were shaking too much. "Emma, oh my God, no, no, no," Lily cried. Her heart pounded as she crouched over her daughter, worried about the mess but even more about Adrian, imagining the fury that would descend upon them. Adrian, who had been watching from his leather armchair, did not move. His eyes were calm, sharp, assessing the scene, but his lips were barely curved in a twitch of what could have been amusement. He stood slowly, deliberately, like a general stepping onto the battlefield to survey the damage without panic. "It's just fabric," he said softly, his voice carrying across the silent room. "She's human." Lily froze mid-motion. Her hands hovered over the disaster. Her mouth slightly open. "Excuse me," she whispered, unable to believe what she had just heard. "It's just fabric," Adrian repeated, walking toward them, hands clasped behind his back. His steps were slow and measured. "It can be cleaned. Humans cannot. She is not broken. The carpet is not broken." "Step back." The staff, who had been hovering nervously near the edges of the room, gasped. They had never seen him so calm. Not when the chandelier had almost fallen last year, not when an antique vase toppled in the hallway, but now, juice-red, sticky, bright was spreading across a multi-$1,000 carpet. And he was unconcerned. Some of them exchanged stunned whispers, unsure if they were witnessing madness, or some hidden side of Adrian Kingsley they had never seen before. Emma blinked up at him, juice dripping down the side of her little hands. "It's okay," she asked, voice small, hopeful. "It's okay," Adrian said, kneeling slightly to bring himself closer to her level. He kept his tone soft, patient, almost fatherly, and something in his eyes softened that Lily had never seen before. "Now," he added, glancing at the bright red puddle creeping across the fibers, "every important thing deserves a name. What shall we call this accident?" Emma's eyes sparkled with sudden inspiration. "I know." "Juicy monster," she exclaimed, pointing at the red puddle like it was her newest creation. Lily buried her face in her hands, mortified and exasperated at the same time. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she muttered repeatedly, trying not to laugh, trying not to panic, trying to do everything at once. Adrian's lips twitched into a small, almost invisible smile. "Juicy monster," he repeated slowly, as though tasting the words. "Yes, that fits perfectly." He straightened up, still calm, still not angry. "Juicy monster it is." Emma clapped her hands in delight, bouncing slightly in Lily's arms. "Yay, I made a monster. Can we keep him forever?" Lily peeked through her fingers, finally letting out a small, nervous laugh. "I think we'll survive, Emma," she said softly. She looked at Adrian, her eyes wide, silently asking if he was serious. He simply nodded. "We'll survive. Humans first. Fabric second." The tension in the room eased a little. Even the staff, still shocked, relaxed slightly. For the first time, Lily noticed something unusual. Adrian Kingsley, the man whose presence always demanded respect, whose house had always felt like a museum, was smiling, not fully, not openly, but enough that it reached his eyes. Emma beamed at him. "See, Juicy monster isn't scary at all." "No," Adrian said, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "He's perfect." In that moment, the mansion felt a little less like a silent museum. The carpets were still pristine in Adrian's mind, but the air had shifted. For the first time in years, the house felt like it could hold laughter, chaos, and tiny hands spilling juice across the floor, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of love. It started subtly at first. Adrian Kingsley, the man whose schedule had always been regimented down to the minute, began arriving home earlier than usual. He didn't even realize he was doing it. One day it was 5 minutes earlier, the next day 15, and then, somehow, he found himself walking through the front doors while the sun was still warm and the staff were adjusting the curtains. He didn't plan it. He told himself it was coincidence, a shift in traffic, or a sudden meeting cancellation, but deep down, a small voice in his mind nudged him. Emma was usually waiting in the hallway, her little face lighting up whenever he appeared. She would drop whatever she was doing and run toward him, tiny hands waving, her curls bouncing. "Uncle Rich Man," she would shout, and he would freeze, caught between surprise and amusement. One evening, as he settled into the armchair near the living room window, Emma waddled over with her plastic cup of juice. Ignoring the now infamous juicy monster carpet, she plopped down on the floor in front of him, staring up with wide, curious eyes. "Why don't you smile?" she asked suddenly, tilting her head. "You smile a little when you laugh with me, but not all the time." Adrian blinked, caught off guard. I'm busy," he said, though the words sounded weak even to him. "Busy," Emma repeated. "But if you're busy, why do you come home when the sun is still awake?" "That's not busy. That's waiting." "Are you waiting for me?" Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't know how to answer. No one had ever asked him these questions. Adults were polite. They complimented him, feared him, avoided him. This tiny human, with juice-sticky fingers and curls bouncing, was looking straight at him as if he were a mystery she had to solve. Emma leaned forward, propping her chin on her hands. "Are you rich because you don't buy toys? Or because you never play?" Adrian stiffened, unsure how to respond. He had never thought about it that way. He had wealth, more than anyone he knew, but he didn't buy toys. He didn't play. He had forgotten what fun felt like. His lips pressed together, and for a long moment, no words came. Emma waited patiently, as though he had all the time in the world. Then she said softly, almost accusingly, "You should smile more. Toys make people happy. Smiles make people alive." He looked down at her, his calm voice cracking just slightly. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know what to say to this little girl. This whirlwind of honesty and curiosity. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own silence, his own emptiness, pressed against the simplicity of her words. Lily, standing quietly in the doorway, watched him. She didn't interrupt, but she could feel the change, the subtle shift in the mansion, in the air. In Adrian, he was no longer just the distant, disciplined billionaire. He was a man caught off guard by the innocence of a child, unable to answer questions that were somehow both simple and impossible. Emma grinned at him, undeterred by his silence. "You don't have to answer right now," she said, "but maybe you should smile before bedtime." "It's nice, I like it." Adrian swallowed, his mind racing, yet strangely still. For the first time, he realized that coming home early wasn't an accident. He had been seeking her laughter, her questions, her presence even if he couldn't admit it yet. Lily Carter's days had started to feel like a balancing act on a tightrope stretched thin over an endless abyss. Mornings began before the sun, with Emma tugging at her sleeve for breakfast and cartoons. While Lily scrambled eggs and poured juice, she simultaneously loaded the washing machine and tried to sweep the floors, all while humming a shaky tune to calm her daughter. After breakfast, she would move on to dusting the grand living room, polishing the silverware, and making beds that seemed to grow taller by the hour. Every task demanded perfection. Adrian's house was immaculate, and the staff, though helpful, expected her to maintain a level of order that sometimes felt impossible. And in the middle of it all, Emma clung to her legs, asking endless questions, singing songs, and occasionally spilling something that required immediate attention. "Mommy, why does the chandelier sparkle so much?" Emma asked one morning. pointing up at the crystal fixture above the dining table. "Because it's very special, sweetheart," Lily said, rushing to wipe the juice Emma had spilled on the counter. "Now, let's eat quickly so we can finish chores. Can we finish chores together?" Emma asked innocently, holding a tiny duster. Lily smiled tiredly. "Not right now. Honey, maybe later." The day went on like this, a blur of cleaning, cooking, and attending to Emma's needs. Lily barely had time to breathe, and her exhaustion grew heavier with each passing hour. And then, one evening, it happened. Emma's small body was burning with fever. Her little coughs rattled the room, her skin flushed, and her usual lively energy was replaced by weakness. "Emma, oh sweetie," Lily murmured, lifting her daughter gently. She ran a damp cloth over her forehead, worrying over every little rise in temperature. "You need rest. Mommy will take care of you." But as she moved, a sinking feeling grew in her chest. The mansion was so big, the rooms so numerous, the tasks so endless. Could she really manage all of this? Could she take care of Emma properly while keeping up with Adrian's high expectations? Her hands trembled as she laid Emma down in the small bed Lily had set up, tucking her in carefully, hoping the fever would not get worse. By the time the night fell and the house sank into its usual quiet, Lily finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. But exhaustion and worry pressed on her chest, and she found herself sitting alone in the kitchen, wiping her tears with the edge of her apron. "I can't do this," she whispered softly into the dark, the sound swallowed by the vast mansion. "I can't keep up. I'll fail her. I can't." She tried to stop the sobs, but they came anyway, soft and quiet, so no one would hear, or so she thought. Unbeknownst to her, Adrian was walking past the kitchen on a late errand, checking on something trivial that could have waited. He paused in the doorway, the faint sound of her voice reaching his ears. He did not interrupt. He did not make a sound. His usual composed, distant self observed quietly from the shadows, listening as she poured out her heart in whispers and sobs. Lily pressed her hands to her face, shaking slightly. "I'm sorry, Emma. I'm sorry, Mr. Kingsley. I can't do everything." Adrian leaned against the doorframe, silent. He did not step forward. He did not speak. He allowed her voice to fill the quiet kitchen, to echo across the polished floors, to reach him. And in that moment, he realized something he hadn't admitted before. She was struggling, not just with chores, but with her life, her fears, and the weight of caring for her little girl alone. He pretended not to notice. He walked away eventually, closing the door quietly behind him. But he listened. He listened and thought. He thought about the small figure struggling in the kitchen, wiping tears from her cheeks while keeping her daughter alive and safe, and a warmth he hadn't felt in years began to stir in his chest. He did not offer advice. He did not scold. He did not intrude. He only listened, and sometimes, just listening, was enough. It started on an ordinary afternoon. Adrian had come home early again, though he didn't realize it. The sun was still high, spilling golden light across the polished floors of the mansion. The house was quieter than usual. Emma was playing in the living room, Lily tidying up the kitchen, trying to stay ahead of the endless chores. Adrian walked past the familiar armchair, planning to grab a book and settle in, but then he noticed something he hadn't expected, the flickering light of the television. Curious. He stopped in the doorway. There, on the large screen, were bright colors, silly characters bouncing across the screen, and a high-pitched theme song blaring cheerfully. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes glued to the show, her small hands clapping along with every funny movement. She didn't notice him at first. "Emma," Adrian said carefully. Stepping closer. What are you watching? Cartoons," she exclaimed, turning to him. Her eyes wide. "Look, Mr. Fuzzy fell in the mud again." She giggled, pointing at the screen where a fluffy purple creature slipped and slid in a puddle, landing on its tiny round bottom with a loud splat. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You enjoy this, yes?" Emma said, bouncing a little. "It's so funny, watch him spin," before he knew it. Adrian had sat down on the couch, trying to observe cautiously, his expression neutral. But the moment Mr. Fuzzy's tiny arms flailed wildly and the mud splattered everywhere, something unexpected happened. A laugh escaped from Adrian, soft at first, hesitant, then louder, richer. Something that hadn't come from him in years. Emma froze and blinked up at him. You're laughing," she said in surprise, her mouth forming a small O. Adrian's eyes widened. He hadn't realized it was so loud. He coughed, trying to cover it, but the warmth of the sound surprised him even more than it did her. He looked down at Emma, who was now smiling, clapping her hands in delight. I didn't know I could," he murmured, shaking his head, half amused, half stunned. Emma climbed closer, leaning her small shoulder against his leg. "When you laugh," she said softly, her voice serious in a way that made him pause, "your eyes stop being tired." Adrian blinked, caught completely off guard. He looked down at her, at the innocence in her little face, and felt something stir in his chest. His eyes, which had carried years of discipline, solitude, and careful control, felt lighter somehow. Less rigid. He tried to speak, but the words didn't come. The world outside the mansion, the board meetings, the contracts, the pressure, they all seemed to vanish for just a moment. "Your eyes," Emma repeated, tilting her head, watching him carefully. "They're happy now." "I like it." Adrian swallowed, his throat tight. He hadn't realized how much tension he carried, how heavy his gaze had become over the years. And now, because of a tiny child watching a silly cartoon, laughing at the absurd antics of a purple creature in the mud, something inside him shifted. He let out another laugh, softer this time, a laugh that carried relief, amusement, and something tender he hadn't known he could feel. Emma giggled too, reaching for his hand. "See? Fun is good. Smiles are magic." Adrian didn't let go. He stayed there, quietly watching the cartoons, letting the ridiculous colors, the over-the-top sounds, and Emma's delighted commentary wash over him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply enjoy the moment. The mansion no longer felt like a cold museum. The rooms no longer echoed only with silence. For the first time in a long time, it felt alive. He glanced down at Emma, who was bouncing slightly in excitement, eyes bright, cheeks flushed from laughing. "Thank you," he whispered, almost to himself, though she didn't hear him. "For this," Emma tilted her head, her small smile lighting up the room. "For what?" He just shook his head and chuckled again, hiding the sudden lump in his throat. There were no words for this moment. Nothing could describe it, how a tiny girl and a silly cartoon had cracked the walls around his heart, if only a little. For the first time in years, Adrian Kingsley laughed, and when he looked at Emma, he noticed something even more extraordinary. She had already noticed the change too. Adrian Kingsley had never bought toys in his life. To him, they were frivolous, unnecessary, and most importantly something he didn't need. Yet somehow, the sight of Emma's wide eyes, her laughter spilling through the mansion like sunlight, had begun to plant an idea in his mind. At first, He told himself he was buying them for decoration. Plush bears, small wooden trains, colorful blocks all carefully arranged on shelves or in glass display cases. To add color to the living room, he muttered to himself, patting the packages as if they were fragile investments. But Emma, of course, had other plans the moment she discovered the boxes. Her little hands tore through the wrappings with unstoppable excitement. "Toys, Mommy! Look, toys!" she shrieked, throwing herself at the stuffed animals and wooden trains. She climbed onto the couch, tossed blocks in the air, and organized the bears into what she declared family meetings. "Emma," Lily called, trying not to panic, "careful, you're going to ruin." But Adrian, standing silently in the doorway with a perfectly neutral expression, only watched. He had expected chaos. He had expected Emma to ruin everything, yet the sight of her laughing, squealing, and arranging the toys with total abandon stirred something in him he hadn't expected, joy, and something else, something quieter, more tender. He wanted her to have this happiness. So he did more. Slowly, carefully, he began building small spaces for Emma to explore. A mini library, with tiny chairs and shelves low enough for her small hands to reach, appeared in one corner of the mansion. Each book was carefully selected not for its value, but for the stories inside: picture books, fairy tales, and little adventure novels lined the shelves. Adrian watched as Emma crawled onto the tiny chair with a book nearly as big as her, squealing when she realized she could turn the pages herself. "Look, Mommy, I can read it all by myself," she said proudly, pointing at a story about a dragon and a little girl. Lily watched from the doorway, a mixture of amazement and disbelief on her face. You did all this for her?" Adrian shrugged lightly, pretending nonchalance. "For decoration," he said, though his eyes betrayed him. "Yes, decoration." The next surprise came when Adrian attended one of Emma's school events secretly. Of course, he had no interest in being seen by other parents or the media. He hid in the back, observing quietly as Emma performed a small song with her classmates. Her tiny voice rang out, full of courage and joy, and for the first time, Adrian realized how much he had missed watching a child grow. Emma spotted him anywhere, her eyes lit up, and she waved frantically, calling his name in the middle of the performance. The other parents glanced around in curiosity, whispering behind their hands, but Adrian ignored them. He smiled, truly smiled, something Lily had never seen from him before. After the performance, Lily finally cornered him in the empty auditorium. "Mr. Kingsley, what are you doing here? How long have you been watching?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Adrian's expression was calm, almost amused. "Long enough," he said softly. "I didn't want to be seen, but she deserved to have someone watch." Lily's stomach flipped. She had known he was changing, had noticed the small gestures, buying toys, building a library, letting Emma lead him in silly games, but seeing him attend the school event, quietly cheering for her daughter, made her nervous. Something in Adrian's behavior was shifting. Something in him was softening, becoming human, and that scared her. "What are you thinking?" she asked carefully, almost whispering. Adrian turned, meeting her gaze. "I'm thinking, she's happy. And if I can give her this, even a little, why not?" Lily swallowed hard, unsure whether to be relieved, amazed, or alarmed. The man she had once feared, who had seemed untouchable, distant, and cold, was now bending the rules of his life for her child. For Emma. Emma, of course, was completely unaware of the subtle tension. She ran around, dragging a plush bear along the floor, stacking blocks into towers taller than her tiny frame. "Look, Uncle Rich Man. I made a castle." Adrian crouched down, examining the leaning towers with a careful eye. "Impressive," he said softly, "but it might fall." "Then we'll build it again," Emma exclaimed, laughing. Lily watched quietly, torn between relief that her daughter was happy and nervous excitement at the undeniable truth. Adrian Kingsley, the man who had once ruled his mansion with silence and order, was changing, and she didn't know if the world was ready for what that change might bring. It was a quiet afternoon in the mansion, the kind where sunlight poured through the tall windows and dust motes danced lazily in the beams. Adrian sat at the long dining table, sipping his coffee, reviewing some reports. The papers were important, numbers and charts lining every page. But today his attention was only half on them. The other half was on Emma, who was darting across the floor, carrying a basket of plush toys, her curly hair bouncing with every step. "Emma, be careful," Lily called from the kitchen doorway. "Don't spill anything." "I won't, Mommy," Emma replied, barely glancing at her mother. She was focused on her mission, bringing the royal bears to Adrian so they could have a meeting in the dining hall. Adrian looked up from his coffee just as Emma reached the end of the table. She planted herself firmly in front of him, holding a tiny bear with an air of authority, and looked up with those big, earnest eyes. You need to listen, Daddy," Emma said confidently. The words hit Adrian like a bucket of ice water. His eyes went wide, his coffee paused mid-air. Silence filled the room instantly. Even the sunlight seemed to hold its breath. "Daddy," he repeated slowly, his voice a mixture of shock and disbelief. Emma blinked, then frowned slightly. "Yes. You're the boss of the bears." "So, you're Daddy." Lily froze in the doorway, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. The staff, who had been quietly tidying nearby, froze mid-step. A feather duster hung in mid-air. A mop leaned awkwardly. Even the clock seemed to tick more loudly as everyone held their breath. Adrian's hand shook slightly as he tried to take a sip of his coffee, and then it happened. The coffee tipped over, sliding toward the edge of the polished table, spilling a dark, rich line across the pristine surface. He barely caught it with one hand, his heart racing. He looked down at the mess, then at Emma, who was grinning proudly. "Oh," she said, noticing his expression. I mean sorry. Daddy almost." She waved her hands frantically as if correcting the air itself. "Not real Daddy. Just Daddy almost." Adrian's jaw loosened. For a moment, he was speechless. The coffee still clutched in one hand. Then, despite himself, a laugh bubbled up from deep inside him. It was soft at first, then louder, shaking the stillness of the mansion, rich with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Emma giggled too. Delighted that her daddy almost had made him laugh, she hopped onto the chair next to him, clapping her small hands. "See, I'm funny, right?" "Yes," Adrian said between laughs, still holding the coffee. "Yes, you are. Very funny." Lily, still frozen in the doorway, let out a shaky laugh herself, relief washing over her. The staff, once tense as statues, relaxed, some exchanging whispers about the rare sight of Adrian Kingsley laughing at anything, let alone a child's innocent mistake. Adrian wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, shaking his head. "You nearly gave me a heart attack, young lady," he said, though his smile lingered. "And yet, I can't be mad." "Not at you," Emma beamed. "I knew you'd like me. Even if I called you Daddy by mistake." "Daddy almost," Adrian corrected gently, his tone softening, almost tender. He set the coffee down carefully. Yes, Daddy, almost. That seems very accurate. They both laughed again, the sound filling the mansion in a way it rarely had. The chairs no longer creaked from tension, the floors no longer echoed with emptiness. Even the sunlight felt warmer. In that moment, a tiny word, a small mistake, had changed everything, if only for an afternoon. Lily sat on the edge of the small bed she had set up for Emma, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emma was asleep, curled under a soft blanket, her little chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of dreams. The mansion was quiet now. The kind of quiet that felt heavier than usual when no one spoke. Lily could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the occasional tick of the grand clock in the hallway, but nothing else, and in that silence, her thoughts roared louder than any sound could. She worried about everything. She worried about Emma, about her own exhaustion, about the impossibility of keeping up with the mansion, the tasks, the constant attention Adrian seemed to demand, but mostly, she worried about what people would think. What would the neighbors say if they saw a single mother working in a billionaire's home? What would the staff think if they suspected she was struggling? What if gossip reached her family back home? She had spent her life trying to keep her head down, to do what was right without attracting attention, and now the weight of her choices pressed against her chest like a physical force. I can't do this, she whispered softly to herself, brushing a loose curl from her face. I can't. Not for much longer. She had already drafted the words in her head, letters she would write to Adrian, explanations for why she had to leave. She imagined handing in her resignation, telling him she couldn't manage the work and the child at the same time, that it was too much for one person, that Emma deserved better. The thought of leaving Emma behind in a mansion filled with wealth and opportunity tore at her heart, but she had to protect herself and her daughter. The next morning, she found herself distant with Adrian, avoiding his gaze, keeping her replies short and polite. She had hoped he would not notice, but he did. Adrian Kingsley, who had been patient and surprisingly gentle, now furrowed his brow, sensing a subtle shift in her demeanor. He noticed the way her smiles came slower, the way her voice trembled ever so slightly, the way her eyes darted away when she thought he wasn't looking. Lily, is something wrong? He asked one evening, standing by the dining table, as she hurried past with a tray of food. Lily froze, her hand gripping the edge of the tray. No, sir. Everything is fine, she said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Adrian's sharp gaze lingered. You've been distant lately, more than usual. Lily's chest tightened. She wanted to explain everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the guilt, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded, forcing herself to speak lightly. I'm just tired, sir. It's been a busy week. Adrian frowned slightly. In his mind, he had been seeing her differently. He had noticed how attentive she was to Emma, how careful she was with the house, how she handled every challenge without complaint. And yet now, this distance, this subtle coolness, felt like rejection. Had she decided she didn't want to work here anymore? Or worse, did she resent him for intruding into her life? His chest tightened with a feeling he didn't fully understand. He didn't often feel uncertain, but now, standing in the quiet dining room, he did. Lily, he said carefully, trying to bridge the invisible gap growing between them. If I've done something, if I... Lily turned sharply, guilt flashing across her face. No, sir. You haven't done anything? It's me. I need to think about things. She lowered her eyes, unable to meet his. I'm sorry, really. I shouldn't be like this. Adrian's expression softened, but his mind raced. Think about what? He asked gently, though there was an edge of worry in his tone. Your work, Emma, or me? Lily shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. It's nothing, sir. I just what? Adrian pressed softly, taking a step closer. You know you can tell me anything. Lily swallowed, her throat tight. She wanted to confess everything that she felt overwhelmed. That she had considered quitting. That she feared the judgment of others, but she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she forced a small nod. I'll manage. I promise. Adrian watched her carefully, the quiet tension between them stretching the space in the room. He wanted to reach out. To bridge the gap, to tell her that she didn't have to do it all alone, but he didn't. He had never been good at reading subtle fears, and he misunderstood her distance as rejection, as if she were pulling away from him personally rather than from the weight of her life. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Emma's laughter from the morning seemed like a distant memory. The mansion, usually filled with energy when the little girl was awake, now felt impossibly large, cold, and quiet. Lily felt the pull of her decision, her plan to quit. To protect herself, but Adrian felt the sting of what he perceived as loss. Neither spoke. The emotional tension hung in the air, thick and heavy, stretching across the polished floors, bouncing off the high ceilings, filling every corner of the mansion. Each of them wrestled with feelings they couldn't fully name: guilt, fear, misunderstanding, and the fragile beginnings of something deeper that neither wanted to admit. Finally, Lily excused herself, hurrying past Adrian to check on Emma, leaving him standing alone, staring at her retreating figure, his chest tight with confusion and unease. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew without knowing why that he didn't want to lose her. The night was unusually still in the mansion. Even the usual hum of the refrigerator seemed quieter, the ticking of the grand clock slower, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Emma's small bedroom was dimly lit by a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. The soft glow bathed her toys and little bookshelf in gentle warmth, but it wasn't enough to chase away the shadows of her dreams. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the calm. "Mummy! Mommy!" Emma's small voice shook with terror, and Lily, who had been checking on the remaining chores in the kitchen, froze. She rushed toward the sound, her heart pounding, only to find the room empty. Emma had climbed out of her tiny bed shaking, eyes wide with fear. Adrian, who had been quietly reading in his study nearby, heard the cries as well. He didn't pause to think. His long legs carried him across the polished floors faster than he usually moved. He reached the bedroom doorway just as Lily appeared, breathless and worried. "Emma," Adrian called softly, stepping into the room. The little girl was sitting on the floor, hugging herself, trembling. Hey, it's okay. I'm here." Emma flinched but didn't run. Instead, she looked up at him with tears streaking her cheeks, her small hands clutching at her pajamas. "The monsters. The shadows. They're chasing me," she whispered, her voice quivering. Adrian knelt slowly, careful not to startle her further. "It's okay, Emma. There are no monsters. Not here. Not ever." But Emma shook her head violently, hiding her face in her knees. Her small body was shaking with fear. Adrian's heart tightened as he realized how small and fragile she truly was, how much she depended on the people around her. Without thinking, he scooped her up into his arms, cradling her carefully against his chest. She smelled faintly of shampoo and baby lotion, a scent that brought a strange, tender warmth to him he hadn't known he could feel. "SHH, SHH," he murmured, rocking gently. "You're safe now. I've got you. No one can hurt you." Emma sniffled against his chest, then asked quietly, her small voice so soft it almost got lost in the vast room, "Uncle, why don't you have a family?" The word struck Adrian like a lightning bolt. He froze mid-step, holding her closer, feeling the tiny weight of her body against him. And suddenly the walls of control and composure he had built around himself began to crumble. He could feel his throat tightening, the familiar coolness, and his chest giving way to something raw and human. He wanted to answer. He wanted to explain why his life had been so lonely, why the mansion had always been silent, why no one had ever reached him like this little girl was reaching him now. But the words lodged in his throat and formed impossible. Emma tilted her head slightly, still trembling, and looked up at him with innocent eyes that reflected trust and fear at the same time. "You're not sad all the time," she whispered. "Not when I'm here." Adrian's chest ached. He swallowed hard, fighting back a lump in his throat. "No," he whispered back, his voice barely audible. "Not when you're here." She snuggled closer, tiny arms wrapping around his neck. "Then, maybe you should have a family," she murmured, almost to herself. Adrian blinked, the tears threatening to spill despite his best effort to remain composed. He carried her gently to her bed, laying her down carefully under the soft blanket. He adjusted her pillow and tucked her in, watching her small chest rise and fall, still slightly uneven from the lingering fear. "I'll always protect you, Emma," he said quietly, his voice thick. "Always, no monsters ever, I promise." Emma's eyelids fluttered. Her voice barely a whisper now. "Promise, Daddy?" Almost. Adrian's lips twitched, a mixture of a sad smile and the strain of holding back tears. "Yes, Daddy, almost," he whispered back. He sat beside the bed for a long while, staring at the gentle curve of her sleeping form. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his loneliness, the ache of the family he had never had, and the strange, stirring hope that maybe, just maybe, this little girl and her mother could be the beginning of something he had never dared to imagine. The mansion, so cold and silent before, seemed softer somehow, filled with the faint echoes of life, laughter, and the promise of connection. And for the first time, Adrian Kingsley almost cried just a little, holding onto the fragile, beating heart of the child who had unknowingly begun to heal his own. The night was quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. The soft glow of Emma's nightlight painted gentle patterns on the walls, but it could not mask the worry written across her small face. She had been restless, shifting under the covers, and finally, with a tiny sigh, she turned to Adrian, who had been sitting silently on the edge of her bed after carrying her from her nightmare. "Uncle, Daddy," almost, she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to tug at the corners of his heart. She reached for his hand with tiny, trusting fingers. The same fingers that had once clutched him in fear, now holding him in hope. Adrian swallowed hard. "Yes, Emma," his voice was careful, hesitant, and softer than it had been in years. I wish." She began slowly, blinking big, innocent eyes up at him. "I wish you were my daddy, so Mommy won't cry anymore." The words hit him like a tidal wave. He froze, his breath catching in his chest. For a moment, the world stopped, the mansion, the silence. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator seemed to vanish. Emma's small, earnest eyes were locked on his, innocent and full of trust, unaware of the magnitude of what she had said. Adrian's mind went blank. He felt like the ground had shifted beneath him, like someone had opened a door inside him that he hadn't even known existed. His chest ached. tight with a mixture of longing, fear, and disbelief. The image of Lily exhausted and worried flashed, and his mind, her hands trembling, as she tried to manage Emma, the quiet tears he had overheard in the kitchen late one night. The way she always tried to hide her pain from everyone, and then his thoughts drifted further. Deeper, to himself, his own lost dreams, the life he had once imagined, memories he had buried, a family he had hoped for and never had, birthdays spent alone, celebrations he had avoided, friendships that had withered under the weight of his ambition, love that had never had the chance to bloom. All of it came rushing back in a painful flash, the life he had built, rich beyond measure, yet hollow, empty, and cold. Emma's hand squeezed his. "Please, my daddy," she whispered, small and urgent. "So Mommy won't cry." Adrian's eyes stung. He blinked rapidly, trying to blink away the emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He opened his mouth, tried to say something sensible, something rational, but no words came. He could promise nothing, not that he could fix everything, not that he could erase the struggles, not that he could suddenly be the father Emma wished for. And yet, his heart had already decided. Without planning, without thought, without permission, it had chosen. It had chosen her laughter, her innocence, her tiny hand in his. It had chosen Lily, the mother who fought every day to give her child a better life. It had chosen this family he had never dared to imagine. He knelt closer, brushing a loose curl from Emma's forehead. I can't promise everything, Emma," he whispered. His voice thick with emotion, rough with years of control slipping away. I can't promise that everything will be perfect. I can't promise," he faltered, choking slightly on the words. Emma's small eyes searched his. You don't have to promise, Daddy, almost. "Just stay." Adrian's chest ached as he felt the weight of her trust, the fragility of her hope, the quiet plea behind her words. He nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'll stay," he said finally, his voice trembling, barely more than a whisper. "I'll stay." He sat beside her, holding her hand in his, and for the first time in years, Adrian allowed himself to feel everything he had been avoiding: love, hope, longing, and the bittersweet ache of lost time. He let the past flash before his eyes, memories of dreams unfulfilled, moments wasted in solitude, choices made in ambition's name, but he let them pass like clouds. He had Emma here, alive, trusting, needing him, and he had Lily, the woman whose strength had captivated him in silence, whose presence made his mansion feel less like a museum and more like home. Emma yawned, her tiny hand still resting on his. "Thank you, Daddy, almost," she murmured, eyes closing. Adrian watched her sleep for a long while, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the faint smell of her hair, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he simply stayed, holding her hand, feeling the impossible weight of love and responsibility settling on him, feeling his heart make a choice he had never dared to make before. He hadn't promised the world, he hadn't solved every problem, but in that quiet moment, he had promised something far more powerful, himself. He had promised to be there, to protect, to care, to stay, and that promise, though small and fragile, was enough. The mansion felt warmer, somehow softer, alive with the quiet echo of hope. Adrian Kingsley, the man who had spent years locked in solitude, rich and lonely, had discovered something priceless, that hearts, even broken ones, could choose love again, and tonight, his heart had already decided. The boardroom was cold and imposing, filled with leather chairs and polished wood, and the air was thick with tension. Adrian Kingsley sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The board members were restless, their whispers slicing through the otherwise formal silence like a blade. They had always respected him, feared him even, but tonight, something in their tone carried a different edge. Curiosity, suspicion, maybe even judgment. "It's unusual, isn't it?" one man muttered under his breath, glancing sideways at his colleague, a single mother in the mansion, with access to the master's schedule. "Don't you think it could be manipulative?" "Exactly," another whispered, leaning closer, his voice low but sharp. "She's clever, she's ambitious, and now the boss seems distracted. It's obvious, isn't it? She's controlling him, getting what she wants." Adrian felt the words reach him like a physical blow. His jaw tightened, a vein throbbing faintly at his temple. He had expected gossip, but not this blatant, not this cruel. He had expected judgments, perhaps even jealousy, but never accusations aimed at Lily, aimed at his home, aimed at Emma's mother. A third board member spoke up, louder this time, ensuring everyone heard. "She's here for influence, mark my words. Kingsley may not even realize it, but she's using the child, the mansion, everything to her advantage. It's manipulation." The room went quiet for a moment, all eyes flicking to Adrian. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like smoke that refused to dissipate. He could feel his pulse in his ears. He could feel the weight of his responsibility to the company, to the shareholders, to Lily, and suddenly, nothing else mattered except the truth he knew in his heart. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor, and all whispers ceased. "Enough," he said, his voice low, dangerous, commanding. The board members flinched. "Enough of this nonsense." A woman on the far side of the table tried to interrupt, her voice sharp. "Adrian, we're only silence," he cut her off, his gaze locking onto hers with a precision that made her falter. "Lily Carter is one of the most honest, dedicated, and selfless people I have ever met. She has done nothing but care for this household, for my daughter, and for this company." His eyes swept across the room, stern and unwavering. "She has never manipulated anyone. She has never schemed. She has never sought personal gain. If you cannot see that, then you are not looking at facts, you are looking at prejudice." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom, some shocked, some uncomfortable. Adrian didn't waver. He could see Lily's face, in his mind her small, tired frame. The countless hours she had spent keeping everything together, protecting Emma, working tirelessly for him without complaint. And he would not let anyone disparage her. He leaned forward slightly, voice softening just a touch, filled with a rare vulnerability. "And as for her position here, it is not a question. She is part of my life, part of this household, and part of this family. Anyone who cannot respect that has no place in this room." The boardroom went completely silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Finally, a few members cleared their throats awkwardly, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Lily, standing quietly near the doorway, felt the tension press down on her. She knew Adrian was defending her. She could hear it, feel it, but she also knew the risks. If gossip spread outside these walls, if the whispers reached their networks, it could affect Emma. It could affect the company. It could affect her life. She couldn't let that happen, not to her daughter. "Mr. Kingsley," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady. I appreciate your words, truly. But I cannot stay. I must protect Emma. This isn't safe for her if rumors continue." Adrian's eyes flicked to her, stunned. "Lily, you don't have to." "I do," she interrupted gently, tears welling in her eyes. I need to leave while I still can. I need to keep her safe. That's all that matters. Adrian's chest tightened, a sharp ache that made it hard to breathe. He opened his mouth, searching for words that could convince her to stay, that could make her see that she had nothing to fear, that the rumors were meaningless compared to the truth. But Lily had already made her decision. I'll always be grateful, she said, voice breaking slightly, for everything, for Emma, for you. She bowed her head slightly, a mixture of sorrow and resolve in her posture, and walked toward the door. Adrian wanted to stop her, to hold her hand, to promise her that she didn't have to leave, but he didn't. Not yet. He only watched. His hands tightening into fists, his mind racing with the unfairness of it all. And when she disappeared from the doorway, the silence of the boardroom settled like a heavy fog. The board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing for the first time that their words had consequences, that their gossip had crossed a line. But Adrian didn't care about them anymore. His attention was entirely on Lily, on the small figure who had sacrificed so much, who had protected Emma, who had stood quietly in the shadows of his life and suddenly become the most important person in it. He sank into his chair, silent, furious, and aching all at once. He knew she had left to protect her daughter, and yet, in that choice, she had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. Family was worth fighting for, even against the world. The mansion felt impossibly quiet when Adrian returned. The polished floors gleamed under the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, but the warmth seemed hollow. The air was still, almost heavy, carrying an emptiness he hadn't noticed before. No tiny footsteps echoed across the halls. No laughter spilled from the living room. No squeals of delight as toys toppled or blocks were stacked into impossible towers. The dolls, the stuffed animals, the carefully curated books all sat untouched, gathering dust in their corners. The mansion, once a home filled with small chaos and unexpected joy, felt more like a museum again, cold, silent, and lifeless. Adrian wandered from room to room, his fingers brushing over the surfaces where Emma had left tiny handprints or crumbs of snacks she had dropped. He paused by the little library he had built for her, seeing the books still neatly lined on the shelves, pages unread, chairs empty. A wave of emptiness washed over him. He realized how much noise, how much chaos, how much life she had brought into this house, and now it was gone. He walked through the hallways slowly, each step echoing unnaturally. He passed the dining table where they had laughed together, the table where she had called him daddy almost, the table where coffee had spilled in shared laughter. He ran his hand along the polished surface, feeling the ghost of that joy, and for the first time, he understood what he had truly lost. Adrian sank into the armchair by the window, staring out at the gardens that seemed so perfectly ordered, so still, so lifeless. He closed his eyes, and memories came rushing back. Emma's laughter, Lily's gentle smiles, the way they had turned his house from a cold, silent place into a home. He remembered carrying Emma to her bed after her nightmare, feeling her tiny body against his chest, hearing her quiet plea for family and the words she had whispered that night, words that had shattered and rebuilt something inside him. He felt a lump in his throat, a heaviness in his chest he could no longer deny. Love. It wasn't just affection, or care, or responsibility. It wasn't the smiles, or the toys, or the laughter alone. Love was everything he had felt when he saw Lily and Emma together, the worry, the protection, the desire to keep them safe, the longing to be part of their lives. It was selfless, it was patient, it was raw and messy and terrifying. Love was absence as much as presence, and now that absence weighed more than anything he had ever known. He thought of Lily, of how she had left to protect her daughter, how she had carried all the burdens quietly, never asking for reward or recognition. He thought of Emma, of how her small voice had pulled him from his solitude, how she had unknowingly shown him the meaning of family. And now they were gone, and he was left with the silence that had once defined his life, but this time, it was different. He realized, finally, that love was not something he could control, not something he could plan, and certainly not something he could ignore. It was an all-consuming force that demanded courage and sacrifice. It had changed him without his permission, had softened edges he thought were unbreakable, had made him feel more alive than any success, any wealth, any achievement ever had. And sitting there, in the quiet that pressed against his ears and chest, Adrian understood the truth he had always avoided. Love was not about possession. It was about presence. It was about giving everything he could, even if it meant facing loss. Even if it meant the mansion was silent. Even if the laughter had faded. Love was the heartbeat of a home. And he had finally learned its rhythm. He opened his eyes and looked around the empty rooms, the untouched toys, the still library. The silence was suffocating, yet it was also honest. He had no one to blame. No one to comfort him, only himself, and the lessons they had left behind. For the first time in his life, Adrian Kingsley truly understood what it meant to love someone completely, without conditions, without expectation, and without holding back. And in that realization, though the house was silent, though the toys were still, though the laughter had gone, something shifted inside him. The mansion was cold, yes, but his heart finally was awake. Adrian had spent the night wandering the silent halls of the mansion, the emptiness gnawing at him in a way he hadn't known he could feel. Every room reminded him of the laughter that had once filled the space. The small footsteps racing across polished floors. The tiny voice that had called him daddy almost with such innocent certainty. He hadn't slept, he hadn't eaten, and as dawn began to filter through the tall windows, painting long, golden streaks across the floors, he realized with a sudden, urgent clarity he couldn't let them go. He hurried through the house, searching, calling softly, almost afraid that Lily had already left, that Emma had already vanished from his life. And then, he heard it, the faint sound of quiet movement, the rustle of clothes, the soft packing of small bags. He followed the sound, his long strides carrying him faster than usual, heart hammering, until he reached the guest room near the back wing. There she was, Lily, bending over the small suitcase she had pulled from the closet, arranging clothes and essentials with careful precision. Her hair was tied back loosely, her expression tight but controlled. She had clearly made up her mind this was the plan she had carefully crafted to protect Emma, to remove them from the mansion. From the gossip, from the risk of scandal. She hadn't seen him yet. Lily, Adrian said. His voice low but steady, carrying through the quiet room. Lily froze, her hands pausing mid-motion. Mr. Kingsley, she said softly, almost apologetically. She didn't turn to face him fully, as if pretending she hadn't heard. As if pretending this confrontation was avoidable. Adrian stepped closer, his eyes scanning the carefully packed suitcase. The tiny shoes neatly placed on top of folded clothes. "You're leaving," he said simply, though the weight of the words made it feel like a thunderclap. I have to," Lily whispered, finally turning to meet his gaze. Her eyes were wide and glimmering with unshed tears. "I can't let anyone hurt her. Emma? She deserves safety. I can't risk." Adrian's jaw tightened, anger and desperation twisting together inside him. "And what about me?" he asked quietly, voice almost breaking. "What about what I want?" Lily's eyes flicked down, guilt written across her face. "Adrian, this isn't about you. It's never been about me. It's about her, about Emma. I have to protect her. That's my duty as a mother." Before he could answer, a small voice pierced the tense air. "Daddy," Adrian's heart stopped. He turned, and there she was, Emma, half awake, hair messy from sleep, pajamas wrinkled, running full speed toward him. Her little legs carried her across the polished floor, and without hesitation, she leaped into his arms, wrapping herself tightly around his neck. "Emma," Adrian whispered, his voice thick, holding her gently. He buried his face in her curls, inhaling the familiar scent of shampoo and baby lotion, feeling the tiny weight of her body against his chest, realizing more than ever how much he could not let her go. Emma pulled back slightly, looking up at him with wide, earnest eyes. You forgot to answer my wish," she said softly, her small hands pressing against his chest. Adrian froze, caught completely off guard. His throat tightened. "Your wish?" he asked, his voice trembling, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and awe. Emma nodded, her eyes serious, tiny brows furrowed, and the way only a child could look when pleading with all the innocence in her heart. "The one I told you, I wish you were my daddy, so mommy won't cry anymore." Adrian's chest ached. The words she had whispered before, words that had shattered and rebuilt something inside him, now echoed louder than ever. He held her tighter, rocking her gently. His eyes glistened, and he felt a lump rise in his throat that he could not swallow. Emma," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can promise everything, but..." Emma interrupted, her small voice firm. "You can answer me now. You forgot." Adrian's lips trembled. He looked down at her, at the trusting little face, at the pure hope shining in her eyes, and in that moment, all doubts, all fears, all misunderstandings vanished. His heart had already decided. Without a word, without planning, without hesitation, he bent down and pressed his lips gently to her forehead. "Your wish is already in my heart, Emma," he said softly. "I promise, I'll do my best. I'll stay, and I'll protect you. And your mommy, always." Emma's eyes sparkled, her small face breaking into a smile that could have lit the darkest corners of the mansion. She hugged him tighter. Then, "My wish came true." Adrian held her for a long moment, feeling the warmth, the trust, the fragile happiness she carried, and he realized, fully and completely, that this little girl, this tiny family, was everything he had been missing. His mansion, his wealth, his silence, they meant nothing without them. He straightened, still holding Emma, and took a deep, steadying breath. Somewhere deep inside, a decision had been made, one his mind had not even needed to question. Emma's wish had not just been heard, it had awakened something in him that would never let them go. The mansion had never felt so alive. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, warm streaks across the polished floors. And the usual quiet that had followed Adrian for so many years had vanished entirely. Emma's laughter echoed through the halls as she played with her toys, though she frequently ran to hide behind her mother, peeking out with that mischievous little smile that Adrian had come to adore. Lily was nearby, gently coaxing her daughter to eat a snack, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her tired eyes soft with care. Adrian watched from the doorway, hands in his pockets, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, yet none of it had prepared him for the raw, overwhelming feeling of standing there and seeing the two most important people in his life together. Ah, so small and precious, so completely unaware of the storm of emotion he carried. He took a slow step forward. "Lily," he said softly, the words strange and heavy in his throat. She looked up, startled at first, but then attentive, sensing the gravity in his tone. "Adrian," she asked, cautious, though her eyes betrayed curiosity. What is it?" He drew in a deep breath, feeling every heartbeat echo in his chest. I need to say something. Something important. And I want you to listen, please, without interrupting me." Lily's lips parted slightly, her small hand brushing against Emma's shoulder as she nodded. "I'm listening," she whispered. Her voice almost fragile. Adrian stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He could feel the warmth of the late afternoon sun against his face, but it was nothing compared to the warmth rising from his chest. They of you spent in silence and solitude finally demanding expression. "I've been a fool," he began, voice low, shaking slightly. "A selfish fool who spent years building walls, thinking that wealth and control could fill the emptiness inside. But then, you came, and Emma came, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew about life, about love, was wrong." Lily's eyes glistened with tears. "Adrian," she began. But he held up a hand gently, signaling her to wait. "I can't promise you the perfect life," he continued, voice growing steadier as he found courage in the truth he had finally accepted. "I can't promise there will never be struggles, or challenges, or days when things feel impossible. But I can promise this: I will love you, not because I owe you anything. Not because I feel gratitude for what you've done for Emma or me, not because the world expects it. I will love you, because my heart chooses you, every single day, because I cannot imagine a life without you. And I don't want to." He knelt slowly, not reaching for a ring, not trying to dramatize the moment with objects. His eyes held hers completely. Steady and vulnerable, raw with emotion he had rarely shown to anyone. "Lily Carter," he said, voice thick but firm, "will you marry me? Will you marry me for love? Not for duty, not for gratitude, but for us, for our family, for the life we could have together." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, spilling freely down her cheeks. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, she could only blink at him, unable to speak. Her heart raced, overwhelmed by the sincerity and courage in his voice, by the honesty that had always been masked behind his wealth and composure. She looked down at Emma, who had toddled closer, and wrapped her small arms round Lily's leg, sensing that something monumental was unfolding. "Oh, Adrian," she whispered finally, her voice breaking. Yes, I will. I'll marry you. For love. Always. For love." Adrian's chest ached with relief and joy. He stood slowly, pulling her into a gentle embrace, careful, reverent, feeling the fragile, miraculous weight of this moment settle on them. Emma squealed, clapping her tiny hands, jumping between them as if to seal the promise herself. "I knew it. I knew my wish would come true," she shouted, her laughter mingling with the soft sobs of her mother and the deep, trembling joy in Adrian's chest. They stood together for a long while, holding each other in the golden light of the late afternoon, letting the quiet hum of the mansion surround them. No words were needed after that. The silence was full of meaning. Adrian held Lily and Emma, the two most precious people in his life, and for the first time he truly understood what love was: not the control of wealth, not the solitude of power, but the warmth, the trust, the vulnerability, and the unwavering choice to be there for someone no matter what. Finally, Adrian pulled back just enough to look into Lily's eyes. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Together, every step of the way." Lily nodded, wiping her tears, her own smile radiant with relief and happiness. "Together," she echoed, her voice strong now, full of hope. And in that moment, the mansion that had once been cold and silent became a home again, filled with laughter, love, and the promise of a future they would build together, one full of joy, mistakes, forgiveness, and above all, family. The day of the wedding arrived, soft and golden, with sunlight spilling gently through the large windows of the small chapel Adrian had chosen. It wasn't grand or ostentatious, no towering floral arrangements, no crystal chandeliers, but that was exactly how Adrian wanted it. Simple, honest, intimate. It was a place where love, not wealth or status, could take center stage. Lily stood near the entrance, her hands lightly clutching the edges of her bouquet. She wore a modest, elegant dress that fell softly round her, the kind that seemed to float as she moved. Her hair was loose, with just a few gentle curls framing her face. Her eyes shimmered with anticipation, excitement, and the faintest trace of nerves. Emma, of course, had been the most excited of all. She had spent the morning running round in her little white dress, making sure her tiny shoes matched, brushing her hair in ways she thought were fancy, and most importantly practicing her big moment. She was the flower girl, and she knew she had a very special role, to announce to the world the truth she had been carrying in her small heart for so long. The chapel doors opened quietly, and the soft hum of the small gathering of family, friends, and staff filled the room. Adrian stood at the altar, impeccably dressed in a suit. But there was a softness in his eyes, a warmth that had never been there before. He watched the doors nervously, his long fingers fidgeting slightly, as he caught sight of Lily. His heart thudded. She looked radiant, not because of jewels or makeup, but because of the love and joy shining from her face. Emma, meanwhile, had already started down the aisle. A small basket of petals in her hands, she skipped slightly, careful to avoid tripping on her dress, and occasionally looked up at Adrian with a grin that made him laugh softly. He had never felt more nervous in his life, not for a business deal, not for any contract or negotiation, but for this small, perfect girl who had changed everything. "Daddy, almost," she whispered under her breath as she passed him, making him chuckle and feel his chest tighten in a way that was almost painful. As the ceremony began, the officiant spoke softly about love, trust, and the courage it takes to build a family. Adrian and Lily exchanged vows, their words simple, heartfelt, and unpolished because neither of them needed fancy language to express what they felt. Adrian promised to love Lily for who she was, to honor her sacrifices, to care for her and Emma without conditions. Lily promised to stand beside him, to nurture their growing family, to share in the joys and challenges of their new life together. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Emma's announcement. She had been practicing all morning, and as she skipped to the center of the aisle, petals spilling on her tiny feet, she cleared her throat loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Now I have a daddy forever," she announced, her voice proud and loud, eyes sparkling as she looked up at Adrian. The room went silent for a brief, suspended moment. And then the tears came, quiet sniffles, gentle gasps, full-blown sobs. Some were tears of happiness, some of relief, some of witnessing love that had waited so long to bloom. Adrian felt the sting behind his own eyes as he looked down at Emma, holding her small hand. "Yes," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Forever, my little one. Always forever." Lily's tears streamed freely as she reached out to hold both of them, her arms wrapping around Adrian and Emma. "I can't believe this, all of us, together," she murmured, her voice breaking but full of joy. Emma twirled in her little dress, scattering petals everywhere, and shouted, "We're a real family now, a real family forever." Her laughter rang through the chapel, pure and unrestrained. And it seemed to wash over everyone, bringing a warmth and light that had been missing for years. The guests, many of whom had known the struggles of the household and the quiet sacrifices Lily had made, wiped their tears and smiled, some laughing softly through their emotions. Even the most stoic staff members, who had watched Adrian Kingsley transform from a distant, silent figure into a man capable of love, were quietly sobbing behind their hands. Adrian bent down to Emma, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You did it, kiddo," he whispered. "You brought us all together." Emma beamed up at him. "I told you, my wish works." Lily laughed through her tears, hugging both of them. "Yes, Emma. Your wish worked, but it was all because of you, and all because of love." And in that moment, the mansion long empty, cold, and silent was reflected in the sunlight streaming through the chapel windows, warm, alive, and full of laughter. Adrian, Lily, and Emma stood together, hands intertwined, hearts beating as one. And for the first time in his life, Adrian felt complete. Forever had begun. The sun was high in the sky, warm and golden, casting playful shadows across the backyard of the mansion. Adrian, sleeves rolled up and tie loosened, stood at the edge of the soccer field he had set up for Emma and a few neighborhood kids. He held a small whistle in his hand and a clipboard tucked under his arm, though mostly he just ran around, shouting encouragement, adjusting positions, and occasionally letting Emma score goals just so her little face could light up with pride. "Come on, Emma, use your left foot," he called, jogging to her side. She giggled, wobbling slightly as she kicked the ball, and it rolled straight past the imaginary goalkeeper, actually just a stack of cones Adrian had set up. "Yes, goal," Emma shouted, arms raised high. "Did you see that, Daddy?" Adrian laughed, a rich, full laugh that echoed across the yard. "I saw it, champ, that's my girl." He ruffled her hair gently, careful not to mess up the tiny ponytail she had tied herself that morning. Lily appeared from the side, wiping her hands on her apron after spending the morning organizing a local charity drive. She was running her foundation for single mothers now, a dream she had quietly nurtured for years. And Adrian had been her biggest supporter, encouraging her every step of the way. Today, she had brought a few of the mothers she worked with and their children to meet Emma and play soccer together. "You're getting better every day, Emma," Lily said, smiling as she watched her daughter kick another perfect goal. "Looks like your coaching is paying off, Daddy." Adrian grinned, his eyes softening as he watched them. "I think it's mostly luck," he said, though he didn't mind the title at all. Emma ran up to him, her little sneakers kicking up dust, and wrapped her arms round his legs. "You're my dad now, really. Everyone knows it," she declared proudly, her small face beaming with confidence and joy. Adrian felt a lump in his throat. "Yes, kiddo," he whispered, picking her up and spinning her around gently. "I'm your dad, forever." Lily laughed softly, tears threatening to spill, her heart full of gratitude for the family they had built together. She watched as Adrian taught Emma to pass the ball to the other children, guiding her with patience and laughter, the same patience and care he had shown in their home for the past months. The mansion was alive again, echoing with laughter, shouting, and tiny feet running across the floorboards. It was no longer just a house, it was a home. Later, as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lily gathered the mothers she was helping to explain the goals of her foundation. She spoke with confidence, passion, and warmth, knowing that every effort she made had a ripple effect, that every life she touched would be stronger because of her work. Adrian stood nearby, watching her with quiet admiration, marveling at the woman he had come to love more deeply than he ever thought possible. Emma, exhausted but exhilarated, ran back to her father. "Dad," she shouted again, "I won today. And I didn't even fall." Adrian laughed, ruffling her hair once more. "I saw that, champ. I'm proud of you." He looked over at Lily, and the two of them shared a quiet smile. No words were needed. The life they had built together, the love they shared, and the family they had chosen spoke louder than any vows, any wealth, or any past pain ever could. And as they watched Emma chase a stray soccer ball across the yard, Adrian realized something he hadn't truly understood before. Love isn't about blood. Family isn't always the people you were born to. It's the people who choose to stand beside you, protect you, and care for you. Sometimes, children small, innocent, and full of unfiltered honesty could heal the deepest wounds in adults. Sometimes, the laughter of one little girl could fill a mansion, a heart, and a life with more joy than anyone ever imagined possible. Adrian reached for Lily's hand, and she squeezed it gently. Their fingers intertwining naturally. They didn't need grand gestures now. They had each other. And they had Emma, and that was more than enough. The sun set, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink, the backyard alive with life, laughter, and love. And in that perfect, quiet moment, the truth was simple and undeniable. Love isn't about blood. Family is chosen, and sometimes children, tiny, fearless, and full of heart, heal adults who never knew they were broken. Emma ran past them one more time, shouting gleefully, "I have the best daddy ever, and the best mommy too." Adrian and Lily laughed, tears mingling with smiles, knowing that they had found the family they had always wished for and that their hearts, once lonely, were now full forever.